I'm Jessica, 29 years old, and I still remember the exact moment I realized my own sister had betrayed me in the most public way possible. After spending months helping plan her dream wedding, I discovered Charlotte had deliberately excluded me from her bridal party while including girls she'd known for barely 6 months. What happened when I confronted her about this changed our relationship forever, and the revenge that followed exposed the truth about who she really was. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted completely, hit that subscribe button for more real revenge stories. Charlotte and I grew up in the same house, but we might as well have lived on different planets. As sisters with only a 2-year age gap, everyone expected us to be best friends. Instead, our childhood was defined by an unspoken competition that I didn't even realize I was losing until it was too late. Charlotte had always been the golden child, born with striking green eyes and naturally wavy blonde hair that photographed beautifully. She seemed to glide through life effortlessly. I took after our father's side with darker features and what my mother diplomatically called a more serious disposition. Where Charlotte was the social butterfly who made friends instantly at every school event, I was the quiet one who preferred books to parties and found my confidence in academic achievements rather than social circles. The differences between us weren't just personality-based. From early childhood, our parents' favoritism was painfully obvious, though never directly acknowledged. Charlotte's dance recitals became family celebrations with extended relatives in attendance, while my academic award ceremonies were attended by just my parents, if at all. When Charlotte made the cheerleading squad in high school, our mother threw her a surprise party. When I graduated valedictorian, the family dinner afterward lasted exactly 45 minutes before the conversation shifted back to Charlotte's latest boyfriend. Despite the unequal treatment, I genuinely loved my sister. I was always her biggest supporter, attending every performance, helping her with homework she struggled with, and being her confidant when teenage drama struck. I thought that's what older sisters were supposed to do, give everything and expect nothing in return. Looking back, I realized I was training her to see me as someone whose needs didn't matter. As we moved into our 20s, the pattern only intensified. My college graduation from a prestigious university barely warranted a family lunch, while Charlotte's graduation from community college became a weekend celebration with cousins flying in from out of state. When I got my first teaching job, the family response was lukewarm congratulations before quickly moving on to discussing Charlotte's latest modeling photos for her social media accounts. Then Charlotte met Derek during her final semester. He came from serious money, the kind of family whose name appeared on hospital wings and scholarship funds around the city. Suddenly, Charlotte wasn't just the favorite daughter, she was also the one marrying into success and social providence. Derek was handsome, well-educated, and seemed genuinely smitten with my sister. Despite my growing sense that this development would push me even further to the margins of our family dynamic, I was happy for her. When they got engaged after dating for just over a year, Charlotte called me immediately, practically screaming with excitement about the 4-carat diamond now decorating her finger. I genuinely shared her joy, pushing aside thoughts of my own struggling dating life and modest career achievements compared to her seemingly charmed existence. "You'll be my maid of honor, obviously," she said during that first phone call, and my heart soared. Finally, I thought, this would be my chance to be truly important in Charlotte's life, to have a role that mattered and be recognized as her closest family member. I couldn't have been more wrong about what was coming. The engagement period lasted 8 months, and what started as excitement quickly transformed into something much more complicated. Charlotte threw herself into wedding planning with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Every detail had to be perfect, from the venue selection to the specific shade of ivory for the table linens. Our parents, thrilled about the social elevation this marriage represented, supported every increasingly extravagant decision. As the months progressed, I watched Charlotte transform from my sweet, if somewhat self-centered sister into someone I barely recognized. Wedding planning brought out a side of her I'd never seen before, or perhaps had willfully ignored. She became demanding with vendors, impossible to please with details, and increasingly short-tempered with anyone who didn't immediately understand her vision. No, Jessica, the invitations need to be pearl white, not cream white. God, don't you understand anything about elegance? She snapped at me when I suggested an equally beautiful but less expensive option during one of our stationery shopping trips. Her tone was dismissive and cruel, treating me like an incompetent assistant rather than her sister and supposed maid of honor. The differences between us weren't just personality-based. From early childhood, our parents' favoritism was painfully obvious, though never directly acknowledged. Charlotte's dance recitals became family celebrations with extended relatives in attendance, while my academic award ceremonies were attended by just my parents, if at all. When Charlotte made the cheerleading squad in high school, our mother threw her a surprise party. When I graduated valedictorian, the family dinner afterwards lasted exactly 45 minutes before the conversation shifted back to Charlotte's latest boyfriend. Despite the unequal treatment, I genuinely loved my sister. I was always her biggest supporter, attending every performance, helping her with homework she struggled with, and being her confidant when teenage drama struck. I thought that's what older sisters were supposed to do, give everything and expect nothing in return. Looking back, I realized I was training her to see me as someone whose needs didn't matter. As we moved into our 20s, the pattern only intensified. My college graduation from a prestigious university barely warranted a family lunch, while Charlotte's graduation from community college became a weekend celebration with cousins flying in from out of state. When I got my first teaching job, the family response was lukewarm congratulations before quickly moving on to discussing Charlotte's latest modeling photos for her social media accounts. Then Charlotte met Derek during her final semester. He came from serious money, the kind of family whose name appeared on hospital wings and scholarship funds around the city. Suddenly, Charlotte wasn't just the favorite daughter, she was also the one marrying into success and social prominence. Derek was handsome, well-educated, and seemed genuinely smitten with my sister. Despite my growing sense that this development would push me even further to the margins of our family dynamic, I was happy for her. When they got engaged after dating for just over a year, Charlotte called me immediately, practically screaming with excitement about the 4-carat diamond now decorating her finger. I genuinely shared her joy. Pushing aside thoughts of my own struggling dating life and modest career achievements compared to her seemingly charmed existence. "You'll be my maid of honor, obviously," she said during that first phone call, and my heart soared. Finally, I thought, this would be my chance to be truly important in Charlotte's life, to have a role that mattered and be recognized as her closest family member. I couldn't have been more wrong about what was coming. The engagement period lasted 8 months, and what started as excitement quickly transformed into something much more complicated. Charlotte threw herself into wedding planning with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Every detail had to be perfect, from the venue selection to the specific shade of ivory for the table linens. Our parents, thrilled about the social elevation this marriage represented, supported every increasingly extravagant decision. As the months progressed, I watched Charlotte transform from my sweet, if somewhat self-centered sister into someone I barely recognized. Wedding planning brought out a side of her I'd never seen before, or perhaps had willfully ignored. She became demanding with vendors, impossible to please with details, and increasingly short-tempered with anyone who didn't immediately understand her vision. No, Jessica, the invitations need to be pearl white, not cream white. God, don't you understand anything about elegance? She snapped at me when I suggested an equally beautiful but less expensive option during one of our stationery shopping trips. Her tone was dismissive and cruel, treating me like an incompetent assistant rather than her sister and supposed maid of honor. The only time she seemed to disagree with Derek's mother-in-law was over my friends inviting 10 guests. She intervened and demanded every single one of my guests be removed. The final shot came just 3 weeks before the wedding, and it changed everything between us forever. I was scrolling through Instagram during my lunch break when I saw it. A post from Charlotte's college roommate, Madison, featuring a photo of 5 girls in matching silk robes, champagne glasses raised, with the caption, "Bridesmaid dress shopping for Charlotte's big day," Can't wait to stand by your side, beautiful." My blood turned cold. There were 5 bridesmaids in that photo, none of whom were me. I recognized Derek's sister Emma, our cousins Sophia and Vanessa, Madison herself, and another college friend whose name I couldn't remember. They were all grinning at the camera, holding up gorgeous, dusty, rose-colored dresses. I stared at my phone screen, rereading the caption over and over, hoping I was misunderstanding something fundamental. Maybe this was just a friend's shopping trip and I was still the maid of honor. Maybe my dress would be different, more special. Maybe Charlotte was planning to surprise me. But deep down, I already knew the truth. The pieces that hadn't made sense suddenly clicked into place with horrible clarity. The vague responses when I asked about maid of honor duties, the bridesmaid dress shopping trip that never materialized, the way Charlotte had been treating me more like hired help than her sister and best friend. I had been replaced, not just excluded, but actively replaced by girls who'd known Charlotte for a fraction of the time I had supported her. My hands were shaking as I called Charlotte immediately. She answered on the 4th ring, sounding distracted and slightly annoyed. "Hey Jess, what's up? I'm super busy today with final venue walkthrough stuff." "I just saw Madison's Instagram post," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "about the bridesmaid dress shopping." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Charlotte finally spoke, her voice had changed completely, becoming defensive and sharp. "Oh, that. Yeah, we ended up going yesterday. It was really last minute and you were at work so we couldn't wait." "Charlotte," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "am I not your maid of honor?" Another pause, longer this time. I could hear traffic in the background and realized she was probably in her car, which meant she was having this conversation while driving, rather than giving it her full attention. "Look, Jessica, I've been meaning to talk to you about this," she began, and my heart sunk completely. "I know I mentioned the maid of honor thing when I first got engaged, but that was just excitement talking. I've been thinking about it more seriously, and Emma really should be my maid of honor since she's Derek's sister, and it would mean a lot to his family." The casual cruelty of her tone was breathtaking. She was discussing the destruction of my dreams as if it were a minor scheduling change. "So, where does that leave me?" I asked, though I was terrified of the answer. "Well, you're still super important to me," she said quickly, as if that would soften the blow. "I was thinking you could do a reading during the ceremony, something really meaningful, and obviously you'll have a place of honor at the family table for the reception." A reading. After months of planning, organizing, and supporting her, she was offering me a 3-minute speaking role like I was a distant aunt being thrown a bone? "Charlotte, I don't understand," I said, tears starting to form. "I've been helping you plan this wedding for months. I thought I was your maid of honor. I thought I mattered to you." "You do matter to me," she insisted, but her tone suggested she was already mentally moving on from this conversation. "It's just that the bridesmaid situation got complicated with Derek's family expectations and friend dynamics. You understand, right? You've always been so good about being flexible." There it was. My lifetime of accommodating her wishes, my pattern of putting her needs before my own, had trained her to expect that I would simply accept whatever scraps she threw my way without complaint. "I need to go," I said quietly. "I'll talk to you later." "Charlotte, don't be dramatic about this. It's really not that big a deal. The reading will be beautiful and much more meaningful than just holding flowers and looking pretty." I hung up without responding, my hands trembling with a mixture of hurt, anger, and disbelief. 29 years of sisterhood, 8 months of wedding planning support, and countless hours of my time and energy reduced to a 3-minute ceremony reading because it was more convenient for her social dynamics. I spent the rest of my workday in a fog, mechanically going through the motions of teaching while my mind reeled with the implications of what had just happened. When I got home that evening, I found a text from Charlotte waiting for me. "Talk to Derek about the whole bridesmaid thing. He agrees that having you do a reading is actually more special and honors your intelligence and public speaking skills. The other girls are just there to look pretty, lol. Hope you're not still upset. Love you." The casual dismissiveness of that message, the way she reduced her own friends to decorative objects while trying to spin my exclusion as an honor, showed me exactly how she viewed relationships.
People were utilities to her, valued only for what they could provide and easily discarded when they became inconvenient. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying moments from our childhood and adult relationship, seeing them now through the lens of what had just happened. Every time I'd prioritize her needs over my own, every time I'd celebrated her victories while my own achievements went unnoticed, every time I'd been her emotional support system while receiving nothing in return. I realized that Charlotte had never seen me as her equal, never valued me as a full person with my own needs and feelings. To her, I was the reliable sister who would always be there, always be supportive, always be grateful for whatever small role she decided to give me. But something had shifted in me during that phone call. For the first time in my life, I felt genuine anger towards Charlotte, instead of the usual hurt and disappointment. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and I was done pretending that her treatment of me was acceptable. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything between us. I was going to withdraw my support for her wedding completely. No more vendor calls, no more errand running, no more free labor disguised as sisterly love. And I was going to make sure she understood exactly what she was losing. I started by calling the florist she had asked me to coordinate with about final arrangements. Instead of confirming the order as planned, I explained that I was no longer involved in the wedding planning and they would need to work directly with Charlotte or her mother. Then I called the bakery about the cake tasting she had asked me to attend on her behalf since she would be out of town that weekend. Again, I politely explained that my role had changed and they should contact Charlotte directly. One by one, I systematically removed myself from every wedding-related task she had assigned to me. I sent her a single text message. Since I'm not part of the bridal party, I won't be able to help with the remaining wedding preparations. You'll need to handle vendor communications and pick up orders directly. Good luck with everything. Her response came within minutes. Are you seriously throwing a tantrum because you're not a bridesmaid? This is so petty, Jessica. I thought you were more mature than this. I didn't reply. For once in our relationship, I was going to let my actions speak louder than words. What I didn't realize was that Charlotte had been depending on me far more than she had ever acknowledged, and removing my support would create a cascade of problems that would ultimately destroy her perfect wedding fantasy.
Within 48 hours of my withdrawal from wedding duties, Charlotte's carefully orchestrated plans began to crumble. The first crisis came when the florist called her directly about changes to the centerpiece order that I had been managing. Charlotte had no idea what arrangements had been made or what deposits had been paid because she had delegated all of that to me months earlier. "I thought you were handling this," she told me in a panicked phone call that evening. "The florist is saying there's some issue with the rose variety being available and they need decisions immediately." "I was handling it when I thought I was your maid of honor," I replied calmly. "But since I'm just doing a reading, wedding planning isn't really my responsibility anymore." I could hear the frustration building in her voice. "Jessica, this is ridiculous. Just because you're not carrying flowers doesn't mean you can sabotage my wedding." "I'm not sabotaging anything," I said evenly. "I'm simply stepping back from duties that apparently weren't mine to begin with. You have 5 bridesmaids now. I'm sure they can help you figure out the flowers." The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. Her new bridesmaids, the ones who had replaced me in the bridal party, were proving to be exactly as useless as I had suspected. When Charlotte asked Madison to help coordinate with vendors, Madison replied that she was too busy with finals to handle wedding stuff. When she asked our cousin Sophia to manage the gift spreadsheet, Sophia said she wasn't really a spreadsheet person and suggested hiring a wedding planner instead. But hiring a professional wedding planner 3 weeks before the wedding proved nearly impossible. The good ones were already booked, and the available ones quoted prices that made Charlotte's parents balk. Her dream wedding, built on the foundation of my free labor, was suddenly looking much more expensive. I watched all of this unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and genuine sadness. I loved Charlotte despite her flaws, and part of me genuinely wanted her to have a beautiful wedding.
But I was finally learning to value my own dignity more than her happiness. The situation escalated when Derek's mother called me directly. Somehow she had gotten my number, probably from Charlotte, who was desperately trying to find someone to manage the chaos her wedding planning had become. "Hello, Jessica," she said in the polished tone I recognized from the few times we'd met. "Charlotte mentioned you might be able to help coordinate some vendor details for the wedding." I took a deep breath, knowing this conversation would likely get back to Charlotte and could make things even more uncomfortable, but I was committed to my new boundary. "I appreciate you calling, but I'm not involved in the wedding planning anymore," I said politely. "I'd suggest contacting Charlotte directly, or perhaps one of her bridesmaids could help." There was a pause, and when Derek's mother spoke again, her tone had shifted. "I was under the impression that you were Charlotte's maid of honor. Has something changed?" "Yes," I said simply. "Charlotte decided to have Derek's sister as her maid of honor instead. I'm just doing a reading during the ceremony now." Another pause, longer this time. "I see," she said finally, and I could hear something new in her voice. Disapproval, perhaps, or surprise. "Well, I suppose I'll speak with Charlotte about finding someone else to manage these details." That conversation apparently triggered a family crisis. Within hours, I received a call from my mother, her voice tight with anger. "What exactly are you trying to accomplish with this little stunt?" she demanded without preamble. "Derek's mother just called asking questions about why you're not helping with the wedding anymore. You're embarrassing our entire family." "I'm not trying to accomplish anything except maintaining some self-respect. Charlotte decided she didn't need me as her maid of honor, so I've stepped back from wedding planning duties." "This is not the time for hurt feelings," my mother snapped. "Your sister's wedding is in 3 weeks. You need to put aside this childish behavior and help her." Where was this concern for family unity when Charlotte excluded me from her bridal party? Where was the expectation that she should consider my feelings when she replaced me with girls she's known for 6 months? My mother's response was predictably deflective. "That's different. The bridal party selection is the bride's choice, but family helps family regardless of titles or roles." Then maybe Charlotte should have remembered that before she decided Emma would be a better maid of honor because it would please Derek's family. I'm still family, but I'm no longer free labor. The conversation ended with my mother threatening to have a serious talk with me about family obligations, as if I were a child being disciplined rather than an adult woman setting reasonable boundaries. But the real turning point came when Charlotte's wedding planning stress began affecting her relationship with Derek. According to mutual friends, she had become increasingly difficult to be around, snapping at Derek over minor details and having emotional breakdowns about vendor issues that should have been simple to resolve. Derek, who had been largely hands-off during the wedding planning process, suddenly found himself dealing with crisis after crisis as Charlotte's support system collapsed, and apparently he was not impressed with what he was seeing. The final straw came when Charlotte showed up at my apartment, unannounced, on a Thursday evening, mascara streaked down her face and her usually perfect hair disheveled. When I opened the door, she immediately burst into tears. "I need your help. Everything is falling apart and I don't know what to do." For a moment, seeing my sister in genuine distress, I almost caved. My instinct was to comfort her, to solve her problems, to return to the familiar dynamic where I gave everything and she took everything. But then I remembered the casual cruelty in her voice when she told me I wasn't really maid of honor material. I remembered the Instagram post that had shattered my heart. I remembered 29 years of being the sister who didn't matter as much. "I'm sorry you're stressed," I said gently but firmly. "But you have 5 bridesmaids who I'm sure would love to help you with whatever you need." Her tears immediately stopped, replaced by anger that was all too familiar. You're really gonna stand there and watch my wedding fall apart because you're jealous of Emma being maid of honor? I'm not sabotaging anything, I corrected. I'm simply stepping back from duties that apparently weren't mine to begin with. You have 5 bridesmaids now. I'm sure they can help you figure out the flowers. What happened next would ensure that Charlotte's wedding became memorable for all the wrong reasons.
Charlotte's visit to my apartment marked the beginning of what I can only describe as a complete meltdown. Over the following week, every aspect of her wedding planning that I had been quietly managing began to unravel simultaneously, creating a perfect storm of chaos that no amount of money or family connections could fix. The first major disaster struck when the florist, unable to reach Charlotte for approval on substitute flowers, simply canceled the entire order rather than risk delivering something she hadn't approved. Charlotte only discovered this when she stopped by the shop to see samples and found her name crossed off the order book. "They said they called you 15 times over 3 days," I heard from our cousin Sophia, who had become an unwilling messenger between Charlotte and everyone else. "Apparently, the original roses you wanted aren't available because of some supply chain issue, and when you didn't respond to their calls about alternatives, they assumed you'd found another florist." Without flowers 3 weeks before the wedding, Charlotte was forced to accept whatever arrangements were available from other florists at emergency rates. The elegant white roses and baby's breath she had planned were replaced with a mismatched collection of whatever blooms were in stock. The cost tripled, and the aesthetic she had spent months planning was completely destroyed. But the flower crisis was just the beginning. The transportation company, unable to get confirmation about pickup times and guest count, had given Charlotte's reserved limousines to another wedding party. The cake delivery, which I had scheduled down to the hour, was now completely unconfirmed because Charlotte couldn't locate the paperwork or remember the specific instructions she had agreed to. Derek's mother, who had initially been impressed with how organized Charlotte's wedding planning seemed, was now getting daily crisis calls about problems that shouldn't exist 3 weeks before a wedding. Her opinion of her future daughter-in-law was clearly deteriorating. "Derek's mom asked him if our family always handles important events this chaotically," Charlotte confessed during a desperate phone call. "She's starting to question whether I'm mature enough for marriage." The irony wasn't lost on me. Charlotte's wedding had seemed so perfectly organized precisely because I had been handling all the organizational work behind the scenes. Without my support, she was being exposed as someone who couldn't manage the basic logistics of her own celebration. The social dynamics were shifting too. Emma, Derek's sister and Charlotte's replacement maid of honor, was proving completely inadequate to the role. When Charlotte asked her to coordinate a bridesmaid group chat to discuss final details, Emma created the chat, but then immediately muted it because the notifications were annoying. When Charlotte needed help addressing invitations to last-minute guests, Emma said her handwriting wasn't pretty enough and suggested they print labels instead. The other bridesmaids were even less helpful. Madison was dealing with finals and job interviews. Our cousins lived 3 hours away and couldn't help with local vendor issues. Derek's family friends who rounded out the bridal party barely knew Charlotte and certainly weren't invested in solving her wedding problems. Meanwhile, I was hearing about all these disasters through our extended family and mutual friends, but I maintained my boundaries firmly. When our aunt called asking if I could help Charlotte with seating arrangements, I politely declined. When my mother showed up at my apartment demanding that I stop this nonsense, I calmly explained that I was simply no longer involved in the wedding planning process. The breaking point came when Charlotte realized that no one had confirmed the final details with the photographer. This was something I had been scheduled to handle, including providing a detailed timeline of events and a list of must-have family photos. Without this information, the photographer was flying blind on the most important day of Charlotte's life. In desperation, Charlotte called the photographer herself, only to discover that without proper planning, many of the shots she wanted wouldn't be possible. The photographer needed specific timing information for lighting, location details for equipment setup, and a comprehensive list of family groupings for formal photos.
Charlotte had none of this information organized. "I don't understand how this got so complicated," she complained to anyone who would listen. "Weddings happen all the time. Why is this so hard?" What she didn't understand was that successful weddings required either professional planning or dedicated personal support. She had rejected the personal support I offered and waited too long to hire professional help. Now she was trying to manage complex logistics with just 3 weeks left and no real organizational system. The stress was taking a visible toll on her appearance and behavior. Friends mentioned that she seemed constantly on edge, snapping at Derek over minor issues and having crying breakdowns over problems that felt overwhelming because she had no system for managing them. Derek, who had initially been patient with the wedding stress, was becoming increasingly frustrated. He had expected to marry someone capable and organized, not someone who melted down over vendor communications and couldn't keep track of basic logistics. He said something about wondering if this is what marriage to me would be like, Charlotte admitted during one of her increasingly frantic phone calls. He said his parents' wedding was elegant and seamless, and he doesn't understand why ours has to be so chaotic. The answer, of course, was that his parents' wedding was probably managed by someone competent, either a professional planner or family members who actually cared about the success of the event. Charlotte was learning the hard way that weddings don't organize themselves. The crisis reached its peak when Derek's parents suggested postponing the wedding to allow proper planning time. This suggestion, made during a family dinner I heard about through our mother, sent Charlotte into a complete panic. Postponing would mean admitting failure, losing deposits, and facing the social embarrassment of being unable to manage her own wedding. But the alternative, proceeding with a poorly planned event, risked creating an even bigger embarrassment in front of Derek's prominent family and social circle. Charlotte was trapped in a situation entirely of her own making, and for the first time in her life, no amount of charm or family favoritism could save her.
2 weeks before the wedding, Charlotte did something she had never done before in our entire relationship. She came to my apartment and sincerely apologized. I opened the door to find her standing in the hallway without makeup, wearing sweatpants and an old college t-shirt, looking more vulnerable than I had ever seen her. Gone was the polished, confident woman who had casually dismissed me from her bridal party. In her place was someone who looked genuinely desperate. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. "I know I don't deserve it, but I really need to talk to you." Against my better judgment, I let her in. She sat on my couch and immediately burst into tears. Not the manipulative crying I had seen her use to get her way in the past, but genuine, exhausted sobs. "I messed up," she said when she could finally speak. "I messed up so badly, Jessica, and I don't know how to fix it." I waited, saying nothing. After weeks of maintaining my boundaries, I wasn't going to make this easy for her. "Derek is talking about postponing the wedding," she continued, wiping her eyes with a tissue I handed her. "His mother thinks I'm incompetent. Half the vendors are threatening to cancel because I can't keep track of anything. The florist already did cancel. Everything is falling apart." She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "I know why you stepped back. I know I treated you horribly. I took you for granted and I replaced you with people who don't actually care about me or my wedding. Emma hasn't helped with a single thing. She won't even return my calls half the time." This acknowledgement of the truth felt surreal. Charlotte had never admitted to treating me poorly before, always finding ways to justify her actions or blame others. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked gently. "Because you were right," she said, fresh tears streaming down her face. "About everything. I did use you. I did take advantage of your kindness, and I threw it all away for people who don't even like me that much." She paused, struggling with words. "Madison told me yesterday that she thinks I'm being a bridezilla, and she's only staying in the wedding because backing out now would look bad. Emma said planning my wedding is not her problem when I asked for help with the seating chart. These are the people I chose over my own sister." I felt the mixture of vindication and sadness.
Vindication because my assessment of her priorities had been correct, but sadness because watching someone you love face the consequences of their choices is never entirely satisfying. I'm not asking you to save my wedding, Charlotte continued. I know I don't have the right to ask that, but I need you to know that I understand what I did wrong. I understand that I've been a terrible sister for years, not just during wedding planning. This admission was more than I had ever expected to hear from her. I've been thinking about our whole childhood, how mom and dad always favored me, and instead of feeling bad about it or trying to make things fair, I just enjoyed the attention. I let you be the responsible one, the helpful one, the one who gave everything and got nothing back. She was describing dynamics I had lived with for 29 years, but never heard acknowledged out loud. When Derek asked me why I treated you the way I didn't have a good answer. I just said that's how our family has always worked. But when I said it out loud, I realized how horrible that sounded. What did he say to that? I asked, genuinely curious about Derek's perspective on our family dynamics. He was shocked, Charlotte replied. He said his family would never treat each other that way, and he couldn't understand how I thought it was normal. He said watching me dismiss you made him question whether I was the person he thought I was marrying. This revelation was significant. Derek's reaction suggested that Charlotte's treatment of me wasn't just hurtful to me, but genuinely concerning to someone who supposedly loved her. Is that why you're here? I asked. Because Derek is having second thoughts? Charlotte shook her head quickly. No, I mean, yes, that's part of what made me realize how wrong I've been, but I'm here because I finally understand that I've lost the most important relationship in my life, and I don't know if I can get it back. She looked directly at me for the first time since arriving. I don't want to be the kind of person who treats her sister like hired help. I don't want to be someone who only values people for what they can do for me, but I don't know how to change. Her vulnerability was disarming. This was not the Charlotte that I had grown up with, the one who could charm her way out of any situation and never had to face real consequences for her actions. The wedding is probably going to be a disaster, she said with a bitter laugh. Half the details aren't confirmed, the flowers will be whatever we can get last minute, and Derek's family already thinks I'm incompetent. But honestly, that's not what scares me most. What scares you most? Losing you, she said simply. Realizing that I pushed away the one person who actually loved me unconditionally and did it for people who barely care if I exist. We sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Charlotte spoke again. I know I can't undo what I did. I know saying sorry doesn't erase years of taking you for granted, but I need you to know that I see it now. I see how selfish I've been, and I'm ashamed of it. For the first time in weeks, I felt genuine sympathy for my sister. Not because of her wedding stress, but because she was finally confronting the reality of who she had become and didn't like what she saw. What happens now? I asked. I don't know, she admitted. I guess I figure out how to be a better person, starting with being a better sister to you. What neither of us knew was that the biggest test of her commitment to change was just days away.
The morning of Charlotte's wedding arrived with unseasonably cold weather and intermittent rain, setting the perfect tone for what would become the most chaotic wedding our family had ever witnessed. I had decided to attend, not as a gesture of forgiveness, but because I wanted to see how the situation I had helped create would ultimately unfold. I arrived at the venue early and immediately saw the signs of poor planning everywhere. The florist had delivered whatever flowers were available, creating centerpieces that looked like they had been assembled from 3 different weddings. White roses mixed with orange marigolds and purple chrysanthemums in combinations that would have horrified Charlotte during her perfectionist planning phase. The photography team looked confused, constantly checking their notes and asking venue staff questions about timing and locations. Without the detailed timeline I would have provided, they were improvising everything and clearly frustrated by the lack of coordination. Charlotte's bridesmaids were clustered in the bridal suite, but their energy felt obligatory rather than celebratory. I could overhear Emma complaining to Madison about how early she'd had to wake up, while our cousin seemed more interested in taking selfies than helping the bride prepare. When I found Charlotte, she was sitting alone in front of a mirror while a makeup artist worked on her face. She looked beautiful, but there was tension in her shoulders and worry in her eyes that no amount of cosmetics could hide. "Jessica," she said when she saw me, and I could hear relief in her voice. "I'm so glad you came." "You look beautiful," I said honestly, because despite everything, she was still my sister, and this was still her wedding day. "Do I?" she asked uncertainly. "Everything feels wrong. The flowers are completely different from what I ordered. The photographer keeps asking me questions I don't know how to answer, and Derek seems stressed when I talked to him this morning." I could have told her exactly why everything felt wrong, but this wasn't the time for "I told you so" moments. Instead, I sat down beside her. "Wedding days are always stressful," I said diplomatically. "What matters is that you and Derek love each other." She nodded, but I could see she was fighting back tears that would ruin her makeup. The ceremony itself went reasonably well, mainly because it required minimal coordination beyond showing up and saying vows. Charlotte looked radiant walking down the aisle, and Derek's face lit up when he saw her. Whatever stress had been building between them seemed to dissolve in that moment, and their vows were genuinely touching. But the reception was where the lack of planning became impossible to hide. The first problem emerged during cocktail hour, when half the appetizers didn't appear because no one had confirmed the final catering details. Guests mingled awkwardly with drinks, but very little food, and I could see Derek's mother looking increasingly concerned as she spoke with other family members. The seating chart, which I would have organized weeks in advance, was a complete mess. Several guests couldn't find their assigned tables because the charts were incomplete, and there weren't enough chairs at some tables because the final head count had never been properly communicated to the venue. But the real disaster came during dinner service. The caterers, lacking proper coordination, served the wrong meals to guests with dietary restrictions. Derek's grandfather, who required a kosher meal, was served pork. A guest with severe nut allergies was given a dessert containing almonds. These weren't small oversights, but potentially dangerous mistakes that a competent coordinator would have prevented. I watched Derek's family's expressions grow increasingly disapproving as each new problem emerged. These were people accustomed to well-organized, elegant events, and Charlotte's wedding was providing neither organization nor elegance. The breaking point came during the toasts. The best man, clearly uncomfortable with the chaos surrounding him, made several pointed comments about hoping the marriage would be better organized than the wedding planning process. Derek's father followed with remarks about learning from mistakes and the importance of proper preparation in all aspects of life. Charlotte sat at the head table, trying to smile, but I could see the humiliation in her eyes. This was supposed to be her perfect day, her moment to shine in front of Derek's prominent family and social circle. Instead, it had become a public demonstration of her inability to manage basic logistics. The final blow came when Derek's mother approached Charlotte during the reception. I was close enough to overhear their conversation, and Derek's mother's words were politely devastating. "Charlotte, dear," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "I hope you consider hiring a good assistant once you and Derek settle into married life. Organization is such an important skill for managing social responsibilities." The message was clear. Derek's family had expected to gain a daughter-in-law who could handle the social obligations that came with their status. Instead, they were seeing someone who couldn't even organize her own wedding properly. Charlotte excused herself and disappeared into the bathroom, where I found her crying quietly in a corner stall. "Everyone knows. Everyone can see that I couldn't handle my own wedding. Derek's family thinks I'm incompetent." I wanted to comfort her, but I also needed her to understand the full consequences of her choices. "This is what happens when you prioritize the wrong things," I said gently. "You chose bridesmaids based on how they'd look in photos, instead of who would actually help you. You took for granted the one person who was willing to do the work." She nodded miserably.
I know. And now everyone will remember my wedding as the disaster where nothing went right. What she didn't know yet was that the social consequences of this day would extend far beyond embarrassing memories.
The 3 months following Charlotte's wedding were unlike anything our family had ever experienced. The social fallout from the chaotic event rippled through both our circle and Derek's, creating consequences that nobody had anticipated. Derek's family, who had initially welcomed Charlotte as a charming addition to their social circle, began treating her with polite distance. Invitations to family gatherings became less frequent, and when Charlotte did attend, she was often excluded from planning conversations or decision-making processes. Derek himself seemed different after the wedding. Friends mentioned that he had become more controlling about household management and social commitments, clearly not trusting Charlotte's organizational abilities. Their honeymoon had been cut short when Derek discovered that Charlotte had forgotten to arrange care for the expensive plants in their new apartment, resulting in hundreds of dollars worth of damage. But the most significant change was in Charlotte herself. The confident, socially graceful woman I had grown up with was replaced by someone anxious and insecure, constantly second-guessing herself and seeking approval from others. She started calling me regularly, something she had rarely done since high school. These weren't the casual check-ins of sisters with healthy relationships, but desperate attempts to process the shame and confusion she was experiencing. Derek's mother invited everyone except me to plan his cousin's baby shower, she told me during one of these calls. She said she thought I might be too busy, but I know it's because she doesn't trust me to help organize anything. The irony was painful. Charlotte had spent years taking for granted the organizational skills I offered freely, and now she was experiencing what it felt like to be seen as incompetent by people whose opinions mattered to her. I tried to plan a dinner party last week, she continued, and it was a complete disaster. I burned the main course, forgot to buy wine, and didn't realize until guests arrived that I'd invited 8 people but only had 6 chairs. These were basic hosting mistakes that I could have helped her avoid, but our relationship was still too fragile for me to offer unsolicited advice. The social consequences extended beyond Derek's family. Charlotte's own friend group had witnessed the wedding chaos, and several relationships had cooled noticeably. Madison, her former college roommate and replacement bridesmaid, had started declining invitations and rarely responded to messages. I think people see me differently now, Charlotte admitted during one of our coffee meetings, like they're wondering what else I can't handle properly. This social isolation was particularly difficult for Charlotte because her self-worth had always been tied to other people's admiration. She had never learned to value herself independently of external validation, and now that validation was disappearing. The most heartbreaking moment came when she called me crying after a particularly difficult conversation with Derek. He said he's embarrassed to have me meet his business associates, she sobbed. He said after the wedding disaster, he can't trust me to make a good impression in professional settings. This wasn't just about social embarrassment anymore. Derek's career involved significant client entertainment and networking, responsibilities that traditionally involved both spouses. If he couldn't trust Charlotte in these situations, it would limit his professional opportunities and damage their marriage. I don't know how to fix this, she said desperately. I don't know how to prove that I'm not incompetent. For the first time since the bridesmaid revelation, I felt genuine sympathy for Charlotte's situation. She was experiencing the consequences of a lifetime of avoiding responsibility, but those consequences were more severe than either of us had anticipated. You could start by learning the skills you never developed: organization, planning, follow-through. These are things you can improve with practice. But how? I don't even know where to start. This conversation marked a turning point in our relationship. Charlotte was finally ready to acknowledge not just that she had made mistakes, but that she lacked fundamental life skills that I had been compensating for throughout our relationship. I could help you, I said tentatively,
But it would have to be different this time. Not me doing everything while you take credit, but actually teaching you how to manage things yourself. The look of hope and relief on her face was almost overwhelming. Would you really do that after everything I put you through? I'd be willing to try, but only if you're serious about changing, not just about fixing your immediate problems. What followed was the most honest conversation we had ever had about our family dynamics, our individual shortcomings, and what a healthier relationship between us might look like. Neither of us knew if it was possible to rebuild trust after so many years of dysfunction, but for the first time, we were both willing to try.
Teaching Charlotte basic organizational skills proved to be one of the most challenging things I'd ever undertaken. At 27 years old, she had never learned to plan ahead, follow through on commitments, or manage multiple responsibilities simultaneously. Our first project was helping her plan a simple dinner party for Derek's birthday. What should have been a straightforward event became a masterclass in the skills she never developed. "When should I send the invitations?" she asked, and I realized she genuinely didn't know that people needed more than a week's notice for social events. "How do I know how much food to buy?" was another question that revealed the depth of her inexperience with basic hosting responsibilities. I walked her through creating guest lists, planning menus, shopping lists, and timeline management. Tasks that felt automatic to me required careful explanation and multiple reminders for Charlotte. The dinner party itself went well, largely because I provided behind-the-scenes support while Charlotte handled the visible hosting duties. Derek seemed surprised and pleased by the successful evening, and his parents, who attended, made positive comments about the food and atmosphere. "That felt different," Charlotte said afterward. "Usually, I'm so anxious about messing things up that I can't enjoy my own parties, but knowing I had actually planned everything properly made it fun." This small success encouraged her to attempt bigger challenges. She volunteered to coordinate Derek's office holiday party, a significant responsibility given his professional reputation. I agreed to coach her through the process, but insisted she handle all communications and decisions herself. The learning curve was steep. Charlotte had to understand vendor contracts, budget management, dietary restrictions, and logistics coordination. She made mistakes, several times forgetting to confirm details or missing important deadlines, but she also learned to catch her errors and develop systems for avoiding them. "I never realized how much work you were doing behind the scenes," she told me one evening after a particularly stressful day of party planning. "All those years when events seemed to just happen effortlessly, that was you managing everything." The office party was successful, earning Charlotte genuine praise from Derek's colleagues and boosting her confidence significantly. More importantly, Derek began trusting her with social responsibilities again, acknowledging her improvement publicly. But rebuilding our personal relationship proved more complex than teaching organizational skills. Years of resentment and hurt feelings couldn't be resolved through party planning success. The breakthrough came during an unexpected crisis. Our grandfather had a heart attack and was hospitalized, requiring family coordination for visits, medical decisions, and care arrangements. Our parents, overwhelmed by the medical complexity, turned to both of us for help. For the first time in our adult lives, Charlotte and I worked together as equal partners, rather than our usual dynamic of me doing everything while she took credit. She handled medical insurance communications, while I managed the hospital visitation schedule. She researched rehabilitation facilities, while I coordinated with our grandfather's doctors. "We're a good team," she observed after a particularly productive day of managing his care. "I never realized that before." The experience of working together toward a shared goal, rather than me supporting her individual ambitions, felt entirely different. We were collaborating instead of me serving, and the equality in our relationship was something neither of us had experienced before. "I think I understand now why you stepped back from the wedding,"
Charlotte said one evening as we sat in the hospital waiting room. "You weren't trying to hurt me. You were trying to show me what a real partnership looks like." This insight marked significant growth in her self-awareness. She was beginning to understand that healthy relationships required reciprocity, not just one person constantly giving while the other took. Our grandfather recovered well, and the experience of managing his crisis together has strengthened our relationship in ways that neither of us had expected. We had discovered that we could work together effectively when Charlotte approached our collaboration with genuine respect for my contributions. "I want to keep this going," she said after our grandfather returned home. "Not just the crisis management, but actually being equal partners in our relationship." "What would that look like?" I asked, genuinely curious about her vision. "I don't know exactly," she admitted, "but I know it can't be like before, where everything was one-sided. I want to support your goals too, not just expect you to support mine." This was a fundamental shift in how Charlotte conceptualized relationships, and I was cautiously optimistic about whether she could maintain this perspective long term. The real test would come when she faced new challenges without crisis motivation to keep her focused on growth.
6 months after our grandfather's recovery, Charlotte faced the biggest challenge of her marriage. Derek was offered a promotion that would require them to relocate to another city, but accepting it meant Charlotte would need to establish herself in a new social environment where her past reputation couldn't precede her. The old Charlotte would have panicked about leaving her familiar support systems and social connections, but the woman who called to tell me about the opportunity sounded different, more confident and strategic in her thinking. "I want to take this as a chance to start over," she said, "to build relationships based on who I actually am now, not who I used to be." She approached the move with organizational skills she had never possessed before. She researched the new city thoroughly, identified social and professional organizations she wanted to join, and created detailed plans for establishing their new household. "I want to do this right," she told me during one of our planning conversations. "I want Derek to be proud to introduce me to his new colleagues, and I want to make friends based on genuine connections, rather than just social convenience." When moving day came, Charlotte had coordinated every detail herself. The transition went smoothly. Their belongings arrived on schedule, and they settled into their new home without the chaos that had characterized previous major events in her life. But the real test came 3 months later when she called me with news that would have sent the old Charlotte into complete meltdown. "Derek's new boss wants us to host a dinner party for his major clients," she said. "It's basically a test of whether Derek fits into the company culture and whether I can handle the social responsibilities that come with his position." This was exactly the kind of high-stakes social event that had terrified Charlotte in the past. The guest list included influential business leaders and their spouses, people who expected sophisticated entertaining and would judge both Derek and Charlotte based on the evening's success. "I know I can do this," she said, and for the first time, I believed her. "I've learned how to plan events properly and I understand what's expected. But I wondered if you'd be willing to be my backup support, just in case something goes wrong." The request was different from her past demands for help. She wasn't asking me to manage the event for her, but to be available as a consultant if she encountered problems she couldn't solve independently. "Of course," I said, "but I think you'll find you don't need as much support as you expect." The dinner party was scheduled for a Saturday evening, and Charlotte spent 2 weeks preparing meticulously. She hired appropriate help, confirmed every detail multiple times, and created backup plans for potential problems. On the day of the party, she called only once with a minor question about wine pairings. Otherwise, she managed everything herself with confidence and skill that would have seemed impossible 2 years earlier. The evening was a complete success. Derek's colleagues were impressed with the food, the atmosphere, and Charlotte's gracious hosting. His boss made specific comments about how lucky Derek was to have such a capable partner. "I did it," Charlotte called me the next morning, her voice filled with genuine pride. "I actually did it completely on my own, and it was perfect."
More importantly, Derek's trust in her abilities had been fully restored. He began including her in professional social events again and consulting her about career decisions that would affect them both. "I never thought I'd be able to handle this kind of pressure," she admitted during a video call a few weeks later. "But it turns out I just needed to learn the right skills and believe in myself." The transformation was remarkable. Charlotte had evolved from someone who couldn't manage her own wedding into someone capable of hosting sophisticated professional events that advanced her husband's career. But the most significant change was in our relationship. We had developed a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and reciprocal support, something that had never existed during our childhood or early adult years. "I know I can't undo the years when I treated you badly, but I hope I can spend the rest of our lives being the sister you deserved all along." The sincerity in her voice and the consistency of her changed behavior over many months convinced me that this transformation was genuine and permanent. We had both learned that healthy relationships require ongoing effort and mutual consideration, not just good intentions or family obligations. 2 years after Charlotte's disastrous wedding, our family gathered for what would become an annual tradition, my birthday celebration. For the first time in our family's history, Charlotte had organized the entire event herself, and the difference was remarkable. She had coordinated with all family members about schedules, dietary preferences, and gift contributions. She had chosen a restaurant that accommodated everyone's needs, made reservations well in advance, and even arranged transportation for our elderly relatives. As we sat around the table, I realized this was the first family celebration that had ever been centered around me rather than Charlotte. Our parents, initially surprised by Charlotte's insistence that this be Jessica's special day, had gradually adapted to the new family dynamic, where both daughters were valued equally. "I want to make a toast," Charlotte said, standing up with her wine glass, "to Jessica, who taught me what real sisterhood looks like, even when I didn't deserve her patience or forgiveness." The public acknowledgement of our journey meant more to me than any gift or gesture could have. Charlotte was demonstrating to our entire family that she had learned to value and appreciate me genuinely. "You changed my life," she continued, "not just by stepping back when I took you for granted, but by giving me the chance to learn and grow when I was ready." Derek, who had become a genuine friend during Charlotte's transformation, added his own comments about watching her develop into someone he was proud to introduce in any setting. "The woman I married had potential," he said, "but the woman I'm married to now has turned that potential into reality." Our parents, who had initially blamed me for Charlotte's wedding stress, now acknowledged their role in creating the unhealthy dynamic that had damaged both of their daughters. "We made mistakes in how we raised you girls," our mother admitted. "We thought favoritism would motivate both of you, but instead it hurt your relationship and prevented both of you from developing properly." This admission, coming years later than it should have, still felt meaningful and healing. As the evening wound down, Charlotte pulled me aside for a private conversation. "I know you could have chosen to cut me out of your life completely after what I did," she said. "A lot of people would have. The fact that you were willing to help me learn and grow instead of just writing me off means everything to me." "You're my sister," I said simply. I wanted to find a way for us to have a real relationship, not just the broken dynamic we grew up with. "I think about that wedding sometimes," she admitted, "how humiliated I felt when everything fell apart. But I'm actually grateful it happened because it forced me to confront who I had become." The disaster that had felt so devastating at the time had ultimately become the catalyst for positive change that benefited everyone involved. "Derek and I are thinking about starting a family soon," Charlotte said. "And when we do, I want to make sure our children grow up seeing healthy relationships modeled for them."
The idea of Charlotte as a mother, armed with the self-awareness and emotional skills she had developed, was exciting rather than concerning. I'd love to be involved, as an actual aunt, not just free childcare. She laughed. I think I finally understand the difference. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the unexpected journey our relationship had taken. Charlotte's betrayal had been devastating, but it had ultimately led to something neither of us could have achieved while maintaining our dysfunctional patterns. By refusing to continue enabling her selfishness, I had forced her to develop genuine capability and self-awareness. By stepping back from my caretaking role, I had created space for an authentic partnership to develop. The transformation hadn't been quick or easy, and there had been moments when I doubted whether real change was possible. But Charlotte had proven that people can grow beyond their worst behaviors when they're motivated by genuine consequences and supported by relationships that demand their best selves. Our family dynamic was now based on mutual respect and reciprocal consideration, rather than favoritism and exploitation. Both Charlotte and I had become more complete people through the process of rebuilding our relationship on healthier foundations. The wedding disaster that had felt like an ending had actually been a beginning, the first step toward the sister relationship we both deserved but had never known how to create. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept treatment that diminishes your worth, even when that refusal creates temporary pain for everyone involved. Have you ever had to step back from a relationship to force positive change? What boundaries have you set with family members who took your support for granted? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life experiences about family dynamics, personal growth, and the courage to demand better treatment from the people who claim to love you. Remember that you teach people how to treat you, and sometimes the most powerful lesson comes from removing yourself from situations where your value isn't recognized. Thank you for following Jessica and Charlotte's journey, and I hope it inspires you to prioritize your own worth in all your relationships.